You know Dasher and Dancer and Prancer and Vixen, Comet and Cupid and Donner and Blitzen. But do you recall the most famous reindeer of all? This isn't even remotely what this video is about, but I do want to derail slightly before it's even begun to point out that even though this song claims that Rudolph is the most famous reindeer, it also asks us if we can still recall him. Like, the song doesn't start with saying, oh yeah, no, we all know Rudolph, because he's famous. It starts with, yeah, Rudolph. You remember him, right? Like, famous. You remember? Do you remember? It's not such the song to claim that he's famous, but then also turn around and be like, but do you even remember him? But anyway, like I said, not what this video is about. But this video is still about the song. I would hazard a guess to say that most, if not all of you, have at least heard of the song Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. The question that I do have is, do any of you remember kind of a call and response associated with this song? I have no idea if this was ever an official thing, or if it's just something some people decided to do and it somehow got to little Jeffrey many, many years ago. Whatever the case, there is a version of the song where it's a call and response, where there's a little phrase that gets added to the end of each line. For example, the first line, Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer had a very shiny nose, ends with the call and response of like a light bulb. So each line ended with a different phrase that coincided with the line itself. However, me being the person that I am, I just find myself adding like a light bulb at the end of every single line. Which got me thinking about the topic of this video, and thus this is where we are today. So this video is going to be me ranking how well the phrase like a light bulb works on each line of Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, started from best fitted to least fitted. Told you it was an odd one. Let's go! Number 8. Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer had a very shiny nose. This is the original line that this phrase went with, at least the version that I know. Therefore, it just makes sense to have it be here at the very bottom of the list. Also, it just makes sense. A light bulb is shiny, and Rudolph's nose is shiny. It's a perfect simile. Number 7. And if you ever saw it, you would even say it glows. I promise this video isn't going to be me just going through the lines in song order and coming up with increasingly ridiculous reasons as to why it totally works that way, although that would be hilarious. In this case, the line that immediately follows that first line just happens to really also fit like a light bulb extraordinarily well. Rudolph's nose glows just like a light bulb. Honestly, I would make the argument that both of these lines work with like a light bulb pretty much equally well, but I'm going to put this one slightly higher on the list, if only because the first line is the one that always is paired with like a light bulb. Number 6. Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, you'll go down in history. This one works remarkably well considering that it's not light related. When you consider things that will be remembered throughout history, it makes sense that the light bulb would be one of those things, considering how much easier it makes life. And while it certainly does work in that regard, I am putting it slightly higher on the list for a couple of reasons. The first is that the other two lines are literally about light, and it is difficult to get closer to light bulbs than literal light. And the second is actually a wording thing. If you're going to talk about how important light bulbs are and how they're going to go down in history, I don't think you would just say, like, a light bulb. You would say, like light bulbs, or like the light bulb. A very nitpicky thing to be sure, but that is why it's still pretty low on this list. It still very much works with the phrase. Number 5. Rudolph, with your nose so bright, won't you guide my sleigh tonight? Now, in the original version of this that I know, this line doesn't actually have a phrase attached to it, but I'm including it here for shits and giggles. I debated where to put this line in relation to the previous one that I just talked about. I decided to put it here simply because of the language used. While saying like a light bulb does make a remarkable amount of sense in this situation, I don't think one would normally call what you are using to guide a sleigh through fog as simply a light bulb. Because I think when most people think about lights that guide sleighs or cars or any kind of vehicles, they don't tend to think light bulb, they tend to think headlight. So if it were like a headlight, I would certainly put it higher. But instead, it's like a light bulb, which I just think doesn't make quite as much sense, which is why I have it here on the list. Number 4. All of the other reindeer used to laugh and call him names. If there's one thing I learned putting this list together, it's that while only one line was specifically written with this phrase works really well with most of them. This line is no exception. It's certainly a weird name to call someone, but calling Rudolph a light bulb still makes sense. All that being said, it's not necessarily the most biting of names. It's just kind of a general everyday appliance. And since this is supposed to be pretty extreme from the sounds of it, this just seems kind of like a lackluster insult. Hence it's placed this high on the list. Number 3. Then all the reindeer loved him, as they shouted out with glee. This is a weird phrase to shout with glee. The initial phrase that went with this line, at least the one that I know, was just the word yippee. This word makes a lot more sense to shout with glee. Also, it rhymes, though I acknowledge that is less important. The reason I didn't end up putting this higher on the list is that, honestly, these reindeers kind of seem like dicks, so it almost makes sense that they would just be shouting like a light bulb instead of anything that actually would be gleeful. Especially when you consider that they were making fun of Rudolph's nose at the beginning of the song. It turns it almost into this snide comment, like it's a backhanded kind of compliment, and I think that just kind of makes sense with the way that these reindeers are portrayed in this song. All that being said, it still doesn't make a lot of sense. Number 2. Then one foggy Christmas Eve, Santa came to say. This is an odd thing to say to someone just completely out of the blue. I would find it very weird to have anybody, especially someone as famous as Santa Claus, just randomly come up to me and just say, like a light bulb. It's like Santa is only interested in Rudolph for his nose, which I acknowledge you could certainly make an argument for. However, I would make the argument that the portrayal of Santa, in this song, but also just kind of in general, is as a more caring individual who wouldn't put it so bluntly. Although one more tangent for this video is there are a couple of Christmas songs that do kind of portray Santa as a less than genial individual. There's of course the ever famous Santa Claus Is Coming to Town, where he talks about how he sees you when you're sleeping, he knows when you're awake. But there's also Here Comes Santa Claus, which literally includes the phrase, say your prayers, which nowadays is seen as more of a threat. Maybe it wasn't as much back when the song was written, but when that song plays at work, you know, just like the ones that I'm talking about today, and every single time I hear that word, and I'm like, so we're just fully going Santa being a threatening individual. Anyway, sorry about that tangent. Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. While technically it is true that on this particular evening Santa needs Rudolph's glowing nose, I don't think he would put it so blatantly, and I don't think that he would demote Rudolph to just a light bulb. Still technically makes sense, which is why it's not in the number 1 slot, but it's pretty close to it. Number 1. They never let poor Rudolph join in any reindeer games. Now, I freely acknowledge that I am not a reindeer. Big shock, I know. As such, I'm not going to pretend to know what reindeer games are. But I am just going to come right out and say it. A light bulb is a weird name for a game. I don't even know what that would entail. I also acknowledge that the original line that went with this phrase, like Monopoly, also doesn't make sense because reindeers don't have opposable thumbs, and no other reason. So, who knows? Maybe this line does actually make sense if you're a reindeer. But for me, simply a humble Jeffrey, I think it makes the least amount of sense, and therefore is number 1 on my list. So, that's my list. What do you think? Do you agree? Do you disagree? Are you baffled that this video exists? Me too. But it's here, and it's out in time for Christmas. And yes, this is my official Christmas video. Last year it was a cover of One More Sleep Till Christmas. This year it's a ranking of how well Like a Light Bulb fits with each line of Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. It's an eclectic channel that I run. But until the new year, happy holidays everybody, and I will see you, hopefully soon, in 2023.